Hey Sarain, and welcome to the Our Satsang Journey, the BAPS North American Yuwak Youthly Mandar podcast. Join us as we dive into very real, meaningful, and insightful conversations aimed at keeping us inspired. We'll explore the timeless teachings of Maharaj and Swami and our Guru Parampara to understand how Niyams kind of guide us in navigating life's challenges. Today we'll be covering the power of Niyams, connecting to spiritual discipline and universal harmony. So what if we told you that the key to living a fulfilled, balanced, meaningful life just lied in a few timeless principles? Principles that connect us not only to our inner selves, but also to the flow of the cosmic universe. Today we're going to be diving into Niyams of the BAPS Swaminarayan tradition and understanding how they help us to stay connected with our inner selves, as well as the divine order. As we're going to be talking about Niyams today, let's quickly talk about how we define Niyams. Niyams are spiritual observances that help us guide our thoughts, our actions, and our behavior. These practices lead to inner peace or spiritual enlightenment. I'm very excited to introduce Deepa Ben as our very special guest on today's podcast. Deepa Ben is not just my friend, but she's also an aunt to two very special nieces. She's an educator, and she's also fulfilled a lot of leadership roles as a curriculum coach and facilitator. Currently, Deepa Ben is a teacher librarian offering various learning around STEM, robotics, literacy, equity, and inclusion. She's also a writer who enjoys being active, using her creative mind, and also traveling the globe. So Deepa Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
To start, can you kind of share a niyam that has had the most impact on your life and why?
Sure. So I think a niyam that has had the most impact on my life has been when I was growing up, I took a no TV niyam.
Wow. And what inspired that niyam?
Well, this is a little bit of a funny story. When Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Toronto in 1996, I was 14 years old, and there is an uncle named Suresh Uncle Patel. And I was passing Suresh Uncle one day in the hallway, and he stopped me and he said, "You know that your brother has taken a no TV niyam, right? Are you going to take that niyam too?" And I was like, whoa, I guess so, because my brother and we used to watch plenty of TV together. So I thought, well, if my brother's taking this niyam, then, I really look up to my brother, so I should take this niyam too.
Of course.
So when I went home, though, I saw my brother watching TV, and I was a little confused, and I did say, "Hey, Raj," and I reminded him of the niyam, and then he had no idea what I was talking about. So the niyam was made.
So do you mind talking a little bit about the benefits of taking this niyam?
Yes, absolutely. I feel like I had a lot more time for my family, for any chores or household responsibilities that I used to do at 14 years old. Also being able to focus on my studies and spending extra time reviewing my notes from school. And I also got to hone into some of my skills and focus on some of those skills, like writing, for example.
Wow, what kind of things did you write?
I used to actually write poetry.
Wow, that must have been a very, very different interest than your peer group at the time. What was that like?
Definitely. I think just the fact that I wasn't watching TV, I'm not going to lie to you. Like sometimes it was kind of tough. I felt a little bit left out of certain situations and certain conversations. I remember a time when I was a new teacher, first year teacher, and it always started with, "Hey, did you watch Grey's Anatomy last night?" And I would always be like, "Oh no, here we go, we're dipping into TV, and I won't be able to contribute to this conversation." Of course, I would listen. Sometimes I just kind of zone out a little bit because I wasn't that interested in it. But I feel that I found myself with a ton of more time that I could use in productive ways. And I also became a little bit detached from TV. Over time, I noticed that because I wasn't watching TV, whenever I was in the room with someone who was watching TV, I used to get really agitated. So after some time, I just didn't care for it at all.
I really like that because I often hear this phrase that we waste our time in minutes and not hours. And so I think it's very valuable that you got to use that time towards things that you also like doing, refining skills, refining your talents, and putting that time towards something that's productive.
Thank you.
So what do rules look like now in our adulthood? Some of us are still in university, some of us are still living at home, but our rules continue to be the defining point in our lives. It defines what kind of choices we make, what kind of actions we take. And so when I say things like invisible rules, I mean that they determine how we live. We have rules that inform our routine, our behavior, and so on. For example, I have rules around how often I exercise or how often I practice dance, and that kind of helps me to build a routine in terms of where I want to go with my exercise goals. So, Deepavan, in your adulthood, how do you define niyams, and how do they guide a moral and disciplined life while you're kind of fostering a connection with Bhagwan?
So this is a really interesting question, and I think that when we start driving, for example, we need a guidebook, and when we are going to be cooking something or doing some baking, we go to a recipe, right? So that we have the do's and the don'ts of how to go about these things. So they're like rules. We need to sort of follow those rules. For example, if I'm baking some cookies, I need to make sure that the temperature of my oven is set at 350, if that's what's in the recipe. I need to make sure that I stop at a stop sign. So I've heard our gurus and many Sadhguru Santo refer to as the guidebook to living life. And many times the word restrict, we hear the word restrict or rules when we're talking about niyams. But I feel that when we are discussing niyams, this can make people feel very limited, right? That you're restricted, you're limited. Whereas I feel that niyams are not actually limiting, they are liberating. They liberate us from the things that may hold us down or the things that are not serving us or not helping us to improve in our spiritual lives.
I think the idea of feeling limited or restricted resonates with me a lot. When I was younger, especially in my teenage years, I felt that niyams kind of put me in this box that I didn't want to be in. I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to decide what rules I was going to let govern my life.
Yeah.
But as I get older and older, I find that the same things I once felt restricted and limited by are now the same things that liberate me. They kind of cut out the gray in terms of how should I operate in this situation? What kind of choices should I make in this situation? And so it kind of guides me to act a certain way and not have to overthink it. So thinking about liberation, how do you feel liberated by the niyams that you take?
Well, I choose to eat clean, right? This is just an example that I choose to eat clean. And by eating clean and avoiding foods that are not sattvic, for example, I'm able to have improved focus, and my mind and my body, they feel better. And I'm able to learn to cook and modify my dishes to suit my enjoyment and my needs. Another example is I choose to wear a chandlo. So when I was growing up, being different was not as accepted as it is maybe today. And wearing a chandlo, it just meant that people were going to stare at you. You'd feel uncomfortable. You might be treated differently and perhaps even made fun of, right? For me, my chandlo actually served me very well. I started wearing a chandlo in the year 2012.
Oh, wow.
And I was teaching grade 6 at the time. And I was so worried about what people might think of me. I was afraid that they would judge me or might have some words be criticized or challenged. And the class that I was teaching, there was a few students in particular that I thought might really challenge me, right? And so I decided I'm gonna go for this. I'm just gonna do it and get that first day over with, right? So day 1, I put my chandlo on. I walk into school, walk down the hallways, nothing. Nobody says a word. Not my kid, not my students, not the teachers.
And you were so anticipating it too.
Of course I was, right? I was prepared with all my responses, but nothing. Day 2, same thing. I'm in there with my chandlo. I'm like, what do I need to do? Do I need to make this thing bigger or what? And so I'm walking in there and there's just nothing from the kids again. And I'm like thinking, are people looking at me? Has it rubbed off? What has happened? Day 3 comes around, same thing. And finally, on day 4, I'm talking to one of my students and I'm helping him with something. And he looked at me for a second and he was like, hey, Miss Gohel, what's that? And he pointed to his forehead, right? And so, of course, me being a teacher and being very ready with my student-friendly response, I responded with my planned response, and I said that, this is called a chandlo or a bindi, and it's something that I do when I'm doing my prayers in the morning. As a Hindu, I place this on my forehead as a reminder to me to make good choices. And I said that very intentionally, to hopefully this inspires some of the children, right? And so I was telling the students that this serves as a reminder throughout my day for me to make good choices. The next day, this student came to school, showed me his chandlo that he put on himself.
That's so sweet.
And he said, look, I'm wearing one too, and it's going to help me to make good choices. And this kid, he would get into a lot of hot water with teachers, and he did have some trouble regulating his behavior. So the fact that he wanted something to help him to make better choices was just a really beautiful thing.
I think these are the kind of experiences that remind you that people really will surprise you. You have such an idea of how things will unfold, but people will continue to surprise you and embrace the things about you that you think people won't embrace. Mm-hmm. But people are very open-minded sometimes. So it sounds like this particular story really encouraged you to keep doing your chandlo.
Yeah, and you know what? Not even so much to keep doing it, but to know that it's not as bad as we set our minds that it might be. People are very accepting and loving. And, one day I was actually speaking to my class, my grade 5 class. We were speaking about human rights and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And one of those rights that we talked about was the right to practice your religion freely. And so I shared the story about how I started wearing my chandlo and how I would wear it now with pride. And so the very next day, one of my students, she came to school wearing a hijab, and I was really stunned and really happy, of course, and encouraging, and told her that she looked beautiful. And the parent, the mother, came to me in the after school that day, and just expressed to me how grateful she was for the inspiration and the courage for her daughter to start wearing the hijab. And so to me, this is liberation. When you can practice your religion freely, with confidence, with pride, that to me is the liberation of Niyams.
Yeah, your chandlo brasan kind of reminds me of my own. I also started wearing my chandlo in 2012, and I was in grade 6. So I think that's funny that there's a couple of parallels there between our stories. But mine was a little different in the sense that I was the only person of color in my entire school. And so it brought on a lot of questions, sometimes bullying, comments. And so initially I felt like it was something that was holding me back and setting me apart from this group that I so wanted to belong to. And so it kind of felt like something I was just doing for the sake of doing it. But slowly, as I kind of grew up, went to university, was in high school, etc., I kind of noticed that it uninvited me from a lot of situations that I could find myself getting into trouble. So things like, getting invited to parties, going out for things late at night, people kind of looked at me and saw my general look and were like, yeah, she's not going to be interested in that. And so I didn't have to take on the awkwardness of saying no to people or being like, this is my faith, so I can't. I didn't have to explain to anybody because they looked at me and they knew that this isn't something I would want to participate in.
Yeah, in the same way, I feel that sometimes we care a lot about what other people are going to think. And I know that my true friends, the people who love and care for me are going to respect my Niyams, and Absolutely. They're going to know. And so, when one of my friends says to me, hey, let's go for coffee, and instead of inviting me out for dinner, I very much appreciate when they do that, because it means that they care about me. And those are the people that I really want to associate myself with. Once I was actually going through a very challenging period in my life, and one of my colleagues, they really empathized with me, and they came into my classroom and they were speaking to me just before we started our day, and she was checking in on me, making sure, seeing how I was doing and things like that. And so as she was exiting, she sort of paused at the door, and she turned around with this face, this like confused face, and she said, hey, what religion do you follow? What religion do you practice? And I was like, what does this have to do with anything? But okay, yeah. So it's like, why are you asking? But I told her that I follow the Hindu faith as a BAPS Swaminarayan follower. And then I asked her, why do you want to know? I was just curious. And she explained that she was impressed with the fact that how I was handling my situation, that I wasn't turning to drugs or alcohol. And so she was able in that moment to see the beauty of my niyams that I follow and the beauty of my faith.
I really think that these challenging times in life is where niyams get to shine. They kind of bring out the strength and the resiliency that we all have. They kind of give you a lot of comfort in knowing that you're aligning yourself with the highest entity, the highest spiritual entity in all of existence. And so knowing that you're aligning with someone that really does know everything kind of takes this weight off of your shoulders. Okay, I'm making all of these decisions and they have to go the way I want them to. Otherwise, I'm the one that's going to have to answer for it. You kind of have this faith that Maharaj and Swami are going to take care of it, and I've aligned myself with them. What role do you think the Guru plays in helping us follow our niyams?
Oh, in very many ways, actually. I think that the Guru plays a very central role in making these niyams relevant and as well as accessible for us in our daily lives. And the Guru, I think that they embody these niyams, right? And they embody the niyams that they're teaching us. And they are showing through their lives how to live with these niyams and how to follow them, not just only talking about it, right? So when Swami Shri, we may have heard the prasang, when Swami Shri inadvertently missed the Mangla Arti and how that impacted him and how he felt about that, right? And so this was in Salvas in 2019. And so Mahant Swami Maharaj, he did a fast. He observed a fast, not to punish himself, but in order to maintain that purity of his spiritual discipline. Even though that lapse in missing that Mangalarti, that lapse was not intentional.
So I think one fascinating aspect of niyams is how they kind of relate to our natural and universal order. And something I've been thinking about a lot is the harmony of our universe and what role niyams kind of play in that. So do you mind elaborating on that in terms of how harmony of the universe and niyams kind of go hand in hand?
Oh, wow. That is such a cool question. Yeah, I can give you some of my thoughts. I think, that harmony of the universe that we're talking about, that natural flow that happens through our niyams and how we are connected to, obviously we're connected to our niyams, but those niyams and how we connect on a more global scale. So I'm thinking about, that connection to nature, maybe to each other and to humanity. So to our ancient Hindu practice of yoga. So yes, actually, I do yoga now, as well as in the past, I have done my yoga training certification.
Wow.
And I've done some teaching. I taught kids yoga for a little while as well, so it was good fun during COVID. But yes, I would like to sort of focus in on the word niyam and the ancient yogic tradition and practice that still exists today when it comes to niyam. There are 8 limbs or stages, and the first 2 are yam, which is the abstinence, and niyam, which is observances. And so that first stage, yam, is about the restraints and that moral discipline or those moral vows that we take. And then the niyams are some of those positive duties or observances, like, for example, arti or tar. Mm-hmm. There are some niyams where we are restraining our body and our mind through different fasting, vrats, maybe foods that we don't eat, for example, while we're still, at the same time, we're fulfilling our positive duties and our observances through daily puja, arti, tar, eating those pure foods, that kind of thing.
It sounds like there's a balance between restraining but also kind of filling your bank in terms of spirituality. It's a balance between the two to kind of progress forward.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Oh, I love that. Thank you. So these spiritual disciplines, they help to align an individual's life with a broader cosmic flow, which creates this sense of unity with the universe and facilitating a smoother and more harmonious existence. So niyams are essentially personal practices that align somebody's internal state, so internal state being their mind, their body, their soul, with those universal laws, right? It's the connection between the two. And there are different pathways that help people with that flow and that divine order.
It's kind of like how a person observes the niyam of truth. They're acting in accordance with the principle of cosmic honesty, and they go out of their way to ensure that their actions don't distort or disrupt the flow of truth in the universe.
Yes, let's take the example of ahimsa, right? Ahimsa or nonviolence. So ahimsa or nonviolence, it connects us to the universal principle of compassion and interconnectedness. The interconnectedness and the compassion towards nature and between nature and humanity. So every living being is seen as part of that greater web of life, right? And by refraining from harming each other, whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally, a devotee ensures that they are in harmony with the flow of compassion that sustains life in this universe. And so violence or harm, whether it's intentional or unintentional, it causes the disruption of that flow, and it creates that imbalance that you were mentioning earlier. And so within relationships at work, for example, or in our personal lives, being compassionate to and kind to all, whether it's through our actions or through our words, I think that that's really important. And harmony and compassion towards nature.
So, how do you think Niyams help us deal with the modern challenges that we face in our everyday, like stress, disconnection, etc.?
Wow, this is a great question, and I think it's really practical and something that we all are continuing to practice on our journeys, right? So I mentioned earlier about the yogic connection, right? I made that yogic connection, and niyams are essentially so deep rooted into our identities as Hindus, and so those timeless practices of yoga are still being seen even today in the Western Hemisphere. And so I believe that there's a very strong connection between our niyams and dealing with those modern challenges. So I'm thinking about an example in my building at school. Whenever students are feeling overwhelmed or upset, one of the first things that they're asked to do is take deep breaths. And when we look at some of the different breathing techniques that they're being asked to use, this again connects to our ancient yogic traditions and practices. So let's just think about this, thinking about the different stress that we may have in our life. I'm going to paint a little scenario for you, okay? So let's say that you're at work or you're at school and you've got this big deadline and time is ticking and you are spending all of your hours in the evening, after dinner, on the weekends, and you're just trying to meet that deadline. And along with work, you've got your busy family life, you've got your household responsibilities, and then suddenly your fridge stops working. That happened to me a few weeks ago.
Oh my God.
Yes. Or, your car breaks down and you need to take some time to take it into the shop. So these are your everyday stressors and then some. So now I want you to think about that same scenario, okay? That same situation, but let's sprinkle in some niyams. So you wake up, and when you wake up, perhaps you're waking up to listening to some bhajans. And while you're getting ready, maybe you're listening to some katha, some praptino vichars, and you complete your morning routine for purity of the body. Then you sit down, hopefully undisturbed. I know that it can be hard when there's kids in the picture. I know it's difficult to sometimes do our nitya puja in complete silence when they're around. Bless them. But so I think that if you're able to do it undisturbed, you complete your puja. And then maybe you gather some of your family members to do aarti. And then throughout the day, you make sure that you hydrate, you eat well so that you're able to stay focused while you're working your late hours. Your commute back home, your commutes, they consist of listening to katha or maybe doing some reading, the audiobooks, perhaps, things like that. Then you do Gar Sabha and you're connecting spiritually, you're connecting with your family. And on the weekend, you spare a few hours for your Ravi Sabha, to go to attend Sabha and go to the mandir for darshan. And to be surrounded by like-minded people, our fellow Hari Bhaktas. So all of these things can sort of help to calm you, and they give you those brain breaks throughout your day. And so I think it helps for us when we're practicing those niyams throughout our busy days to help focus our minds steadily on something aside from our day-to-day. And fill our minds with peaceful thoughts and positive thoughts that will bring joy and fulfillment to our lives. And so I think here, which we've talked about a few times, that concept of intentionality and the mindfulness that we have. We do need to be very present when we're observing these niyams. So I'm not just doing arti, or I'm not just doing my puja. In fact, I think it might be really nice if we use the term observing, that, I'm observing these niyams. I'm observing. So it's just sort of changing that little, just shifting that perspective a little bit, and bringing that presence to any moment that we're practicing our niyams, I think is a really positive thing. It's not just like doing the dishes, right?
I like that this recurring theme of intentionality, mindfulness kind of keeps coming back, because it's such an interesting shift from your childhood to adulthood, right? When you're a kid, these niyams aren't necessarily niyams that you're choosing to do. They're the rules that govern your household, and so because you live in your house, you follow the rules.
Mm-hmm.
But as you get older and older, they become choices. You move out of your house, or you no longer live anywhere near your family. I know a lot of us kind of live halfway across the world from our parents, and so no one's kind of watching you and being like, hey, are you going to do arti? Hey, are you going to do puja? All of these things are your choice. And so reinforcing that to yourself, that I'm choosing to practice this niyam, I'm choosing to observe this niyam, that's what's going to help us to kind of realize the benefits and really sit and think critically about why we're practicing these niyams and what benefits they actually have for us. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation, right? You follow the niyam, you see the benefits, and then you want to keep doing the niyam because you see the benefits. And so those are the kind of things that keep us going.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Priyana. And I think, speaking of those benefits, recently in Nairobi, Swami Shri was in Nairobi, Swami Maharaj, and it was January 2nd, 2025. And Swami Maharaj was ready to begin the cheshta. And so in the evening, and so Shruti Priya Swami, he asked that, should we go ahead and start the cheshta? And Swami inquired, and he said, is everybody ready? And so I think just that sheer question alone is so powerful. And Swami Shri is stressing the importance of being ready, being fully present when you're observing these niyams. And so I think that, if we can aim to be present physically and mentally while offering our devotion, then we will definitely be able to reap those full benefits. And, when we're thinking about niyams with the stresses and the disconnection, like you had mentioned, like you asked about, there was this study that was done by the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and the University of Notre Dame. And this study shared findings on how daily religious practice helps to mitigate daily stress and to regulate the emotional responses that we may have to one another or to certain situations. And so ultimately, it produces more optimal health outcomes. And the study, it explained that faith was like a mechanism. And that mechanism reduces the detrimental effects of stress. And so they honed in on different aspects of somebody's religion, their spiritual belief system, that could help to protect an individual during times of adversities. So as I was reading this article, I thought about how Swami Maharaj has stated his support, the support that we could get from our faith right into the Satsang Diksha. So Swami Maharaj in the Satsang Diksha, he states that, Bhagwan is the all-doer, that he is compassionate and he's the protector of all and at all times. He alone is the resolver of all of my adversities. Also, Swami Maharaj in the Satsang Diksha states that during difficult times, what we should do. And he suggests that we remain patient, that we offer pratna, that we persevere. So we keep going, and we keep firm faith in Akshar Purushottam Maharaj.
I really like that. And it kind of reminds me that niyams, we have niyams for a reason, right? Like reading Satsang Diksha daily is a niyam. And so for me, when I read these kinds of shloks in the Satsang Diksha, they always come at the right time when I need to hear them. And you sometimes need these affirmations. There is a much greater entity, the greatest entity, looking out for me. And so for myself, I find that these are the shloks that come at the time when I need them. And so it kind of reinforces that, yeah, these niyams do have benefits, even if it's just needing to hear an affirmation.
That's true. And the support that we get from our gurus, we're very, very fortunate. Now, let me continue telling you about this study. So the study, it gets a little more interesting now because they were not only making these connections between faith and religion and stress, but they studied the ways in which religious and spiritual resources work at a daily level. So this was sort of to your question about the day-to-day stressors, right? That is, how do individuals in their faith, in their daily faith, in those practices, and those belief systems, how do they alleviate the effects of stress?
You know what's really interesting is when I first started working, I felt really lost. I was confused about how I should approach my job, what I should do. I was having a really hard time just keeping up and building a good relationship with my manager.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, especially now in hindsight, it seemed like satsang for me personally was at its peak because the only thing that kind of gave me some sort of solace in the stress was satsang,
Mm-hmm.
because it kind of forced me to take a step back and remember that, I'm here for something far greater than just impressing my boss one day or writing a really good document. I'm here for something that requires much more effort beyond, the little tasks that I get done in the day.
Yeah.
And so things like listening to katha and focusing on my personal satsang is what kept me grounded and kept me from spiraling in the stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And this report actually talked a lot about the connections between the positive psychological well-being and better physical health as well, and how that's linked to religiousness. And so when we think about that connection between religiousness and mental or physical health, we often talk about coping and how one will cope with certain stressors that come into life. And so, I'm thinking about some of the resources that we have, right, to cope with our stress and challenges. For example, listening to regular katha, for example, or doing satsang reading, attending sabhas and goshtis. So if we do these things, then I feel like we're developing that foundation of coping techniques for those stressful times and those times of adversity when they do happen to come upon us.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, it takes a lot of weight off of your shoulders knowing that, you have the support of Swami, you have the support of our entire satsang community. And life is not just the little tasks that kind of stress us out. Life is so much bigger than just that. And so recentering and refocusing on why you're really here helps you to not be so bogged down by the day-to-day. I'm noticing that there's just so much to do in the day, like between our niyams, between work, between just general things that you need to do in the day, time gets kind of filled up really fast. And so sometimes it is challenging to find time in your day to do these practices, to make sure that you have a good understanding of what your coping mechanisms are. So my next question for you would be, I think sometimes spiritual practices can sometimes feel overwhelming in the sense of finding time to do them. What advice would you give to someone who's kind of looking to incorporate niyams into their daily life?
Wow, that's a good question. And yes, I completely agree that it can seem overwhelming for sure. So let me ask you something. What are some things that you do regularly?
Ooh, right off the top, I can think of, I make coffee every single morning. I exercise a couple of times a week. I've recently started doing Bharatanatyam again.
So everything that you just named here, these are examples of micro habits that you are developing over time. And these are things that are really good for you or they bring you joy. And so in order to develop those micro habits, you need to focus step by step. And Yogiji Maharaj used to share this bodh katha that's related to this concept of micro habits and how they're formed. And so I don't know if you've heard this bodh katha before, but there was a farmer named Mr. Patel, and he was carrying a buffalo up and down the stairs regularly, every single day, up and down every day. It started with a very simple task. The buffalo was very small, and every day that buffalo grew, and he continued to change day by day, and so did Mr. Patel. And so one day, his friend, Mr. Patel's friend, comes by the farm, and they challenge each other that who could lift this buffalo up the stairs. And of course, we know that the friend who doesn't have a lot of that practice, those micro habits had not been formed, he's never lifted a buffalo. Whereas Mr. Patel was very easily able to carry that buffalo up and down the stairs due to his micro habits. So this might seem like a very simple story, but I think we can gain a lot of wisdom here. So the farmer actually created those micro habits, and people often focus on building small or consistent habits that can create those lasting change, and it can help us to achieve certain goals that we may have. And over time, these small adjustments, they accumulate, and gradually they bring us closer to the results that we seek. And so the same principle applies to Niyams, that by incorporating in a very purposeful way, if we have these purposeful practices into our daily lives, then we foster that lasting peace, and we foster that lasting spiritual growth as well. So simple actions, for example, like incorporating more vegetables into our diet, or committing to a daily walk, drinking more water, for example. They're all small things, but if we do a little bit each day, you tend to see the benefits. You feel better, you're more hydrated, etc. And over time, this leads to greater physical health.
It kind of reminds me of when I paint. You kind of start painting and you're really excited about what it could potentially be at the end. But you get to this 25% mark where things are kind of looking a little ugly. You're not really excited about all of the effort you've put in so far, and you're kind of worried about, oh my God, I still have 75% of effort to put in, and if it's already looking like this, I don't want to spend all of this time. But the more you kind of spend time doing a little more every single day, you kind of see it come together. When you're too close to it at that 25% mark, you don't see how beautiful it could end up being. You kind of have to persevere, get to the 75, 80% mark, and that's when you kind of see the painting come together. So in the same way, I think Niyams and micro habits go hand in hand. It's putting that intentional practice, a little bit of consistency every single day towards getting to that final painting, towards getting to that spiritual place that you want to be in. So there's a buzzword that I keep hearing in lifestyle podcasts, books, articles. It's just doing inner work. And so I find that the focus of doing inner work is kind of connecting with your inner self or higher self. And for us, that would be connecting with our Atma. And so I think doing that inner work is a byproduct of Niyams. Following Niyams helps us to have instances where we get to sit and focus on what our inner self really looks like, who that really is. And so that also kind of goes hand in hand with another concept that we as Satsangis follow, Antardrashti. It literally means to look within. And so we get that opportunity to kind of assess what our swabhavs look like, what kind of progress we make in our personal sadhana. So yeah, inner work, Antardrashti, Niyams, all of these things kind of have some interplay to help us progress in our sadhana. So a question I have for you is, how do I stay motivated in times when life is getting hectic? I know we talked about that quite a bit, that the day kind of happens to just fill up. You start the day and you blink, day's over. So when things are getting hectic, how do I make time for Niyams? What do you recommend?
Well, I think the first thing that I think we could maybe think about is just reframing how we think about Niyams, right? So how do we talk about them? How do we think about them? So if we are seeing Niyams as liberating, like we spoke about earlier, right? Or we see them as moments of rejuvenation or moments of calm, like we also referred to earlier, rather than those obligations or those restrictions. I have to do this. I think that there's a simple shift that needs to happen with the way that we speak, and help to train our minds to think more positively about Niyams, which will then make them more enjoyable. So one example I have for you is if we're going to a friend's house for dinner, we might say, I can't have onion and garlic. Or a colleague wants to make a home-cooked meal for you, and we say, I have food restrictions, right? These are things we might hear. So instead, why don't we try a shift in language and say that I only eat foods that do not contain onion and garlic, or I have some food requirements. So I think that they're not allergies, right? Oftentimes we might refer to our Niyams as allergies, but they're not allergies, right? they have not been forced upon us. They are ancient traditions that are proven to make our lives better, to make our lives healthier and more spiritual. Sometimes we might catch ourselves saying, I have to go to the mandir on Sunday, right? So maybe we try, I go to the mandir on Sundays. And as I mentioned earlier, I have to do my puja, I have to do arti, can become, it's time for puja now, or it's time for arti.
I think it gets really cumbersome when someone is telling you what to do. When it's you kind of driving the decisions that you make, you're a lot more inclined to do them. When someone else is telling you, oh, make your bed, or oh, make sure you get this done, you already know to do that. But when it's coming from you, you feel a lot more energized to follow those niyams. I think we talked about quite a few things today, so I just want to spend some time recapping and summarizing a couple of the concepts that we talked about.
Sounds good.
One thing that we touched on a number of times was mindfulness and intentionality.
Yes.
Being very clear about the why behind our niyams. When we're clear about those whys, then it's easier for us to actually observe our niyams.
Yes.
Being unclear kind of leads us to be questioning and doubtful about the value of the niyams. When you're clear about this is the value I get out of this particular practice, you're much more inclined to practice that niyam.
Right.
Another thing that we talked about was the connection of the universal flow, right? The niyams that we take, the way we interact with people, all of these things have an impact on the flow of energies in our universe. And so being mindful of what kind of things you're putting out, what kind of things you're taking in, kind of helps us to be aware of how niyams and energies kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, just the practicality of niyams, right? We sometimes see them as limiting or restricting, but it kind of is a liberating practice to help bring discipline and all of these other very good benefits into our lives. And so niyams are practical, and how we can implement them in a practical way, we got a lot of insight into that from you. So thank you for that, Deepa. If there is one message that you'd like everyone to kind of walk away with from this podcast, what would that be?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think just get started. I think that when we make our minds up and we have the right intention, really knowing and understanding the mahima behind the niyam that we are choosing to do, and knowing that Swami Shri is with us to help us along the way, knowing that we have that support. I think just getting started, we have the support of our fellow Hari Bhaktas, our friends, our sisters. And I also think that it, as seamless as it may seem, I think that it sometimes is not that easy. And I think that in those moments when it's not easy, to really just do pratna to Swami Shri and know that he's there supporting you, and give yourself a little bit of grace. We don't need to be hard on ourselves, just allowing ourselves to get up and try it again. So if you slip up, just get right back up there, ask for forgiveness, because he will forgive you, and just keep going.
That was such an insightful comment. Thank you so much for sharing that, Deepa. And thank you again for joining us on this podcast and being our guest today.
Thank you so much for having me.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope that this episode has inspired you in your practice of following niyams. Remember, the niyams that we're prescribed have immense value. It's in our hands to seek out what that value is and build those habits to continue seeing the value. If you have any questions for future topics, please let us know through the feedback form in the description. Join us next time as we continue to have real, relevant, and meaningful conversations. Thank you, and Jai Samnarayan.